I imagine that a number of parents are listening to this and are thinking, wow, that sounds like a really great goal to have with my kids. I want them to be curious question askers, answer seekers, problem solvers, unafraid of looking at things and going, why are they the way that they are? I also imagine, because I know a lot of people listen to this who don't have kids, they're maybe aspiring parents, or maybe they're just interested in how they think about their own education. And they're like, wow, this sounds really cool. I would like to cultivate more of this in myself. You talked a little bit about the structure of how you did this in the Praxis curriculum, and maybe we can get a little more nitty gritty in the weeds there, and this may make more sense depending on where you want to take this in answering this question. How do you think about that a little more philosophically? Like how you cultivate that in a human, because some of it's like there's a nature component to it too. Like some people are just naturally more curious, but there's definitely a nurture component. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I definitely got better at it when I started to observe more and more people who were really good at that, seeming to enjoy themselves more and do better. And the enjoy themselves more part probably even came first, because it's like you can see people that get up at 4 every morning and eat 12 eggs, raw eggs and do better. And you can be like, not worth it, right? Like do better financially or something like that. But someone who's like really enjoying themselves and like, so my good friend, my best friend, TK Coleman, he helped build the curriculum with me and was part of Praxis for the first, 5-6 years there. He's incredible at this. He's just relentlessly curious. And I just would watch him and I'd watch other people that just everything's interesting to them. And they just ask questions and they pursue their interests, no matter how random it may seem. Like I call TK and be like, what have you been reading lately? And he's like, oh, I've been super into reading about mimes. I'm like, mimes? Like people that, or like ventriloquism. Yeah, like ventriloquism. And I'm like, how would you come across that? And it was like some random thing and he spent like weeks reading books about ventriloquism. He didn't want to become a ventriloquist. He didn't like go to ventriloquy shows and find them. He just thought it was a fascinating concept and wanted to like learn everything he could about it and what was the philosophy behind it. And so he did. Whereas I would just have a passing thought. That's kind of a weird thing to pretend like a dummy is talking instead of you. Like, I wonder where that started. And then I would just let the thought go by instead of stopping and saying, well, hold on a second. And I remember my mom was really good at this growing up. We'd be like, Mom, why is this? And she'd be like, I don't know. Let's look it up. Back then we didn't have an internet. So we would literally get out like an encyclopedia and we'd always roll our eyes. Oh, Mom, you always want to look everything up. But it stuck with me, like that concept of if you have a question, go chase it down. And like, so I have tried to do this with my kids and be deliberate. And they do the same thing I did to my mom. To my face, they're like, you're such a nerd. Oh my gosh, who cares? So boring. But I know better because I went through it myself. I know that it's cultivating, it's normalizing to them. So even things like if we're in a coffee shop, I'll look around and I'll have the thought, I wonder if this place is making any money. And instead of stopping there, I'll be like, ask more questions, Isaac. So I'll be asking to myself, and now I'll try to ask them if my kids are there. I'll be like, kids, how much do you think they're paying these people to work here? Okay. How much do you think they pay in rent? All right. How much do you think they have to pay for supplies? Okay, great. So if we break that down, like, what do you think they're paying per month for everything? All right. How much is it how much are they charging for coffee and a cookie? Great. How many cookies and cups of coffee do they have to sell per month to make money? And my kids will not play along most of the time. They'll just be like, ugh. But I'll keep doing that, right? And it's like just demonstrating an approach to life that finds these questions interesting and worth pursuing. One, it makes life is way more fun and just full of enchantment. It's utterly full of enchantment. G.K. Chesterton said, like, we're not struggling for lack of wonder, or lack of wonders, but for lack of wonder. And the sense of wonder, like everything becomes interesting, right? Like, what is that ant doing? Why would an ant possibly do that? Let's look at this ant. Why is it going this way instead of this way? What's going on with it? Is something wrong with it? And following those questions, maybe you look it up, maybe you Google it, maybe you ask a friend, maybe you just keep thinking about it. Maybe you come up with theories, maybe you write a story about the ant, but like chasing those questions, being interested, life gets more interesting and fun. You become more interesting to others. Interested people are interesting people. You're never bored and you're never boring to anyone else. And that makes every conversation easier. People want to be around you. You get more connections and network and things in life. You become a better thinker, especially if you do practices like force yourself to blog every day for 30 days. This is the greatest practice in the world. It's available to everyone. that alone, you'll be like, I have to write something every single day. What am I going to write? It forces you to be like, well, I got to think of something. You'll scan the room. There's my fans. I wonder what fans, why does wind make me colder, even though the temperature is not dropping? Why would blowing wind on me make me colder? I don't know. Literally just write the question out. And suddenly your brain starts like the gears start uncrustifying and things start moving in there that were just calcified. And like, the world becomes a little different. You become a little bit more engaged in everything. So I like, it really starts with just that, saying, can I ask more questions? Can I follow those questions further? Can I be more interesting? Every time my kid asks me a question, let's pursue it a little more. Let's go on Amazon and buy a book about it. Let's sit down and try to read it. They'll probably tune out. They'll probably not like it. But even if I buy the book and it sits there and we never read it, guess what they take away from that? I grew up in an environment where questions were encouraged, and my parents would even invest in books to try to help me answer those questions. That's doing something in them. It's changing the way they see the world instead of just I don't know, don't ask me, or this is what the teacher or the authority said. That's the answer. End of discussion, right? Like, try to cultivate the questions. And I'm telling you, that just unlocks things in your own mind first, and then in the minds of your kids or those around you that will like just pay dividends forever.
And having the book available too, because I do this for myself too. This is a habit that I think I picked this up from Tim Shermack, who I remember he said at one point, like whenever he sees a book that he wants to read, he just orders it. He has an unlimited book budget, and I adopted that immediately.
Yeah, unlimited book budget.
Well, I was nomading for a while and it was hard, but now that I'm like semi-settled, every time I see a book I want, I order it. I don't always read them. I often don't read them right away. It's like, I'll probably read this book in 2 years, but having it in my physical space where I can see it, and it reminds me of the question, completely transforms the nature of questions from this like sort of latent passing thing that you can either latch onto or not. Like, I would have forgotten I was curious about the thing if I hadn't ordered the book. Having it in my space, every time I see it, I am reminded of the question and the reason I found it interesting. And even if I'm not ready to invest in going down the rabbit hole yet, it keeps it front of mind, which sometimes that's enough. Yeah. Like sometimes the thought just getting triggered again and again leads me down rabbit holes I wouldn't have gone down otherwise. So I'm a huge proponent of having the books in the space available.
And you can take the pressure off yourself of this schooled approach of like, I must take a class, I must read a book start to finish, I must get a certificate. Like, I had an email in my inbox months ago, probably 6 months ago or even longer, from Derek Sivers. I subscribed to him. He's like, I don't even know where I first came across him. I usually don't read his emails. I usually don't have time. Every once in a while I open them. I opened one, I scanned it, and he just had a little thing that was like, interesting books I've read. And one of the books listed was called How Buildings Learn. And it was like a really interesting book about like buildings as changeable, dynamic spaces instead of something set in stone, so to speak, whatever. And I was like, that's an interesting concept. And it was similar to some books I'd read years ago by an architect named Christopher Alexander. And I was like, that's kind of cool. I never heard of that book. Click on it. I go buy it on Amazon. It was like $15. Shows up, sits there for 6 months. And my kids are like, what is this book? Why would you order this book? Are you interested in architecture? I'm like, no, it just sounded interesting to me. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. My daughter like randomly picked it up one night, started scanning through it. Was like, I don't really understand most of this. It's a little bit interesting. And I was like, oh, I want to read that. So I pick it up one day and I read like literally like 5 pages of it. But I underline a couple things and I was like, that was a really interesting concept. Put the book away. We pack it up. We're moving. It gets packed up later. I'm writing an email newsletter for Partner Hacker, my current previous company. It just rebranded. And I had this like, oh, this is similar to a concept in How Buildings Learn that I remember reading, even though I only read 5 pages, this thing in software that I just read about. And I just wrote a little blurb about it. Someone else responded, emailed me about that and said, oh, that was really interesting. And they started talking about a related concept, which later came up in a podcast conversation that ended up having somebody like, oh, I loved your podcast. This is my favorite episode. And I can't even remember where this ends. The point is, it doesn't end, right? The point is, I didn't have to actually read. I didn't read the whole book. I still don't really know what all is in there. I want to read it. I hope to. Maybe I will someday. But I saw it. It was interesting. It was curious to me. I jumped on it. I wasn't afraid to take the little bit that I did glean from it and just talk about it and do what I call learning out loud. I didn't present myself as an expert. I didn't pretend that I read the whole book. I was just like, here's a concept from this book that was kind of interesting to me. And it seems similar to this other concept. I don't know. What do you think? Somebody was like, hey, here's what I think. That turned into something else, right? And like, without having done that, there were several conversations and relationships that never would have happened. So take the stress off yourself that like you have to do things in a really formal way. You have to like take the class, finish the whole book, do it. Just as TK likes to say, like recklessly and irresponsibly follow your interests.